Have you ever wondered what it would be like to live in a world where your memories could kill you? Today, we're diving into a chilling dystopian reality that will leave you questioning everything you know about memory, identity, and resistance. Welcome to the Writers' Corner live show. Don't go away, we'll be right back.
Imagine a world where the lines of reality blur with the fantastical. Embark on journeys from humble beginnings to the pinnacles of literary greatness. On the Writers' Corner, we delve into the lives of unique wordsmiths, known for their compelling storytelling. They are artisans who craft fantastical realms, etched in our memory long after the final page is turned. Every tale begins with a single word, a single idea. Authors create sensations that keep you on the edge of your seat. Witness how they transform setbacks into stepping stones, use refusals to spark growth, and turn rejections into catalysts for new inspiration. Witness the diversity in writing as it gives birth to a vast array of genres, from drama to mystery to children's stories, fantasy, and reality. Join us as we uncover sources of inspiration and the magic that defines the author's craft. Find out how authors breathe life into their characters and meticulously craft narratives and plots that captivate readers. Get a sneak peek into upcoming works and join us as we celebrate literary greatness only on the Writers' Corner. We don't just celebrate best-selling Amazon and New York Times authors, but also indie authors. Join us on the journey from the birth of a tale to the creation of a masterpiece, only on the Writers' Corner live show. Stay tuned.
If you have just joined us, then welcome to the Writers' Corner live show. And if you're not yet following us on our social media channels, please do so, because that way you'll get notified the next time we go live. If you haven't met me yet, my name is Bridgetti Lim Banda from Cape Town in South Africa. And in today's show, we're going to be talking to Mark Morton. Our live stream is made possible by Creative Edge, StreamYard, and BeLive Media. Now, before we invite Mark to come and join us, I first want to say hello to my friend and co-host, Mary Elizabeth Jackson. If you haven't met Mary yet, Mary is a 5-time #1 Amazon best-selling author and certified special needs and disabilities advocate, and she's dedicated to empowering underrepresented voices through her writing and advocacy. She's also a speaker, educator, ghostwriter, and songwriter. Mary, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm so excited to be here with you today. And we're excited about our author. It's another show with a brand new author, someone we've never met before. So we're getting to share him with our audience and around the world. And we're global today. We were talking about that before we got on. We are coming from 3 different areas, actually parts of the world. We got the United States, we have England, and we have Cape Town, South Africa. So we're super excited, right?
Absolutely. That doesn't happen very often, but love it when we go live from different continents. So for those of you who've never met Mark, and it's today, he's brand new on our show, so it's the first time we're meeting him. So Mark is the author of The Headmasters, which we'll talk about today, and Cupboard Love, a dictionary of culinary curiosities, which was nominated for a Julia Child Award. Mark's also written 3 other non-fiction books and over 50 columns for Gastronomica, plus numerous broadcasts for CBC Radio on language and culture. Mark has got a PhD in 16th century literature. I don't think I've met anyone with that kind of PhD yet.
That's but
very unusual.
Yes. And I would love to just sit and talk to him, just listen. I just listen.
No, I know. And then as a fun fact, Mark's wife, Melanie Cameron, is also an author. And The Headmasters marks his debut into the world of young adult fiction. So let's invite him to come and tell us more about his book, shall we?
Hi.
Hi. Hi to both of you. Hi, Bridgetti. Hi, Mary.
Welcome, Mark. Good to have you on the show.
We are so excited for you to be here with us today. And we're going to dive right in because we want to get to all of our questions.
Yep.
We're very curious. So the Headmasters introduces a world where memories are both a weapon and a curse. So that's amazing and scary, right? What inspired you to explore the concept of memory control in the dystopian setting? And what a great question, right?
Yeah, well, it's a perfect question for getting into it. Memory has always fascinated me. All the different kinds of memory that we have, you can talk about procedural memory and rote memory and experiential memory, things like that. And I think it's partly fascinating to me because of a couple things. One is I have something called prosopagnosia, which is face blindness. It's harmless, but it means that I have great difficulty recognizing people. So you and I could have a chat for an hour, and if I happen to see you on the street somewhere else a couple hours later, I wouldn't recognize you. I would recognize your voice. So that kind of memory or lack of memory was always of interest to me. But on the other hand, I seem to have a really, really good experiential memory. In other words, I can recall things I did and places I was, myself being there in, I think, pretty vivid detail. And that actually has, in some ways, that's been a challenge because I'm not as young as I used to be. And yet I can recall with great clarity things I did, experiences, places I went, occasions, going back, when I was 20, let's say. And it can be kind of cognitive dissonance when I can remember, when I was 20 and it seems like it happened just yesterday, and yet I know it's many decades later. So those are probably the things about me that got me interested in memory. In a bigger sense too, I'm interested in culture and languages, and what is culture? But it's, if there were no sort of historical memory or cultural memory, where would we be? It also, cultural memory is also what defines us, mostly for the good, sometimes for the bad.
Wow, that's amazing. Absolutely amazing. And what a great, thank you for sharing that about your memory, because I know Bridgetti's probably the same way I am. And I just really kind of thought I was getting older, how I can't remember people's names, but I can remember faces, but not names. Yeah. unless I really put it in my memory. Like if you say, hi, nice to meet you. My name is Mark. And then I would go, okay, I know for myself, I have to say, okay, his name is Mark. Remember that, Yeah.
Yeah. Same for me. I also have a hard time remembering people's names. I'm better at remembering faces, but names, forget it. It's just not my forte. I really struggle. So it was very interesting that you mentioned. Do you know what caused it?
People are just born with it. I like to think, but I don't know. I like to think that the part of my brain that should be devoted to recognizing faces is instead devoted to something else. Maybe language abilities or something like that. But people like, what's his name? The psychologist who wrote The Man Who Mistook His Wife for His Hat, Oliver Sacks. He had the same thing, prosopagnosia. It's not uncommon. I mean, unless somebody tells you, you won't know. I mean, what it does for me is it often creates kind of embarrassing situations that people don't know I have it, and I walk by them. They think, oh, what's he doing? Is he snooty or something? But no. It's just how I was born. And as we age, I mean, I find it interesting that as we age, we start to, struggle for the word. But apparently, it's more common that it's noun loss. We have trouble remembering nouns, not verbs. So I'll struggle to say, "Can you hand me the spoon?" It's always ordinary things, but I won't struggle with, the verb "hand me." It's things that start to fall out of our memories.
Interesting.
It's terrible. I always call things the thingamabob.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it is. It's just pass me the thingamabob.
Yeah. And then somebody gets frustrated and you go, you know what I'm talking about. Just hand it to me,
Yeah.
I know. How old were you when you found out?
Well, I think I was about 20. And it was because I went to university, I started my undergraduate degree, and on campus there was a cinema, and I started going to movies like almost every night with other people. And I realized that, there'd be a character who would be on the screen and talking and stuff like that. And then maybe they went off the screen, they'd be gone for 10 minutes, they'd come back on the screen. It was a few days later and they'd be dressed differently or something. And I wouldn't be able to recognize them. And I would say to the person beside me, so is that so-and-so coming back? And they found it kind of weird, like, well, yeah, obviously it's the same person. So that's when I began to notice it. But I think it wasn't until I learned about Oliver Sacks having the same thing that I was able to put a name, a label to it, prosopagnosia. Big,
but that's
word.
So freeing, isn't it? I mean, if I think of my experiences and things I learned about myself, some things only just very recently, when you can put a name to something, even if it's, not the best thing to know, but being able to put a name to it just really does something for your soul.
Yeah, it can be affirming or freeing. Yeah. One of our kids found that, like, we adopted all of our kids, and Brandon was about 9, maybe he just turned 10 when we had adopted him. And like all kids who get adopted at older ages, they have almost always have like a history of trauma prior to that. And so he was struggling in school, and just they were trying different medications for him. When he was finally diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, it was such a relief, because now he knew what this thing was. And practically speaking too, here in Canada, it opened up a lot of opportunities for different kinds of funding. Whereas if he didn't have that actual diagnosis, the funding wouldn't have been there.
Listen, as an advocate, I always, and I know we're getting off topic, but this is also amazing and interesting. But as an advocate, when I meet somebody who really doesn't want to have their child have a label, things like that, I say to them, if you go to the doctor and you don't get diagnosed for strep or flu or whatever it is, you can't get the medication or whatever it is you need in order to get the proper treatment. And so you have to look at things that way, especially with a child on the spectrum.
Sure.
They really do need that diagnosis to get the services they need, to get the help they need, so they can overcome their challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And he, you were asking about sort of how does it get onto the theme of memory in my novel. And all 4 of our kids too, they had a big influence as well, because again, I mentioned, trauma, post-traumatic stress syndrome, and a lot of it is about maybe not forgetting memories. Maybe that's the worst thing to do when you're experiencing trauma, but rather bringing it out so that those memories of the trauma are no longer kind of lurking and coming out in awful ways. So that experience of adopting them was also very impactful on my writing, I guess, of that novel.
Yeah, that's, anyway, let's get back to the book a little bit before we get completely sidetracked, because it's very easy. I think we've got a lot in common here that we can talk about.
Yep.
So your background is rich in nonfiction, particularly exploring language and culture.
Yeah.
How did your expertise in these areas influence your approach to writing the Headmasters?
Oh, that's a really good question, and there's probably kind of 2 ways of answering it. I'll take the second way, because I think it's to me at least, it's more interesting. I would say they almost had a kind of anti-influence, because I wrote those 4 nonfiction books. Like I guess in 1992 is when the first one came out, and they were books that required a lot of research, analysis, organization, creation of taxonomies, things like that. And I really enjoyed it at the time. It was very challenging. And then we adopted these kids, and my wife, who's also a writer, our writing lives, our writing careers went on hold. Not just on hold, they went into an abyss for 17 years while the kids were growing up, and we were helping them grow up. And then when they got older and more independent, I wanted to start writing again. And at that time, I didn't want to write nonfiction books again. The process of raising kids and reading stories to them and creating stories with them, things like that. I wanted to I wanted to try writing a young adult novel. So that's what I did. The other thing too, I think that contributed to that is, again, I know I'm going back to age a lot, but having got, a couple of decades older, my memory for fact retrieval isn't as good. And so back then, I was able to hold a lot of facts and information in my head at the same time. Couldn't do that now. I just couldn't possibly do it. They say the same thing about chess masters and physicists, that as they get older, they can actually lose the abilities that they once had because of memory declining.
And how do you, I have to ask, how do you do life? Do you meticulously write things down in a diary to remind yourself, or?
I've undertaken more and more of those kinds of strategies. In fact, you won't believe this. I've got terrible handwriting for one thing, but I actually have a little note in front of me in which I have written down Headmasters and Bridgetti and Mary. Like I actually had to write down the name of my novel because I finished a second novel, so it's more in my mind, and I'm starting a third novel, and I didn't want to misspeak and refer to the novel that we're not supposed to be talking about. So really strange things like that, like just jotting things down, using tools that you can find on iPhones or smartphones, things like that. There's only so much one can do, trying to eat healthily. There are various supplements that one can take, I think, to help with memory. But maybe the biggest thing is just accepting as we get older, memory declines. And that's not always a bad thing, because I think because I don't have that ability to retrieve jillions of little facts, it's like I can see an overview of things now, a more global view. And I think that feels better. It feels more relevant to trying to be creative and writing something in terms of fiction.
Yes, right. Well, the good thing is that you're learning, and you've learned to know yourself.
Yeah.
And so you can work on whatever things that feel like a weakness to you to become more strengths, and accepting where your strengths are. And so that's part of resiliency when we are faced with things that are challenges. Absolutely. Okay. The novel draws comparisons to classic works like The Puppet Masters and The Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah.
How do you feel that The Headmasters contributes to the ongoing conversation about autonomy and resistance in the dystopian fiction?
Yeah. Well, let me just take a few seconds to sort of lay out the basic plot of the novel so that I can respond to that question. The basic plot is that, like 60 years ago, I don't mean like in 1960 or whatever, but 60 years ago in terms of some future, some sort of cataclysmic event takes place, which apparently causes all humans on Earth, it scrambles their vocabularies so that they can no longer communicate with each other, and this results in such chaos and mayhem that basically the world comes to an end. The people it doesn't affect are a very small community in northern Canada, northern Ontario, in a community called Blue Ring, and that's actually where this scientific thing was happening that resulted in this catastrophe. But because they were sort of within the ring, they weren't affected. Their language wasn't all scrambled up. But what did happen is they woke up after being sort of knocked unconscious, and they had these creatures attached to their back. I think of them as big, ugly, plate-sized wood ticks, or water beetles, sort of like that. And they sort of burrowed into the brains of the humans, and so for about 18 hours a day, they can control the humans, make them do whatever they want them to do, and so, the humans, the people in that community are, subjugated, enslaved by the headmasters, as has happened so many times throughout history with different kinds of communities. This unique challenge, I think, with the people who have the headmasters on them is that the headmasters can sense what the people are thinking. And so if a person thinks, I'm going to try to get rid of my headmaster, if they even begin to think that, then the headmaster will jolt them with some sort of toxin, neurotoxin, and they will die. So you can't even think about pushing back, about trying to end the oppression. So this has gone on for 60 years until a young woman named Maple emerges, and she's the protagonist who attempts, I won't say what happens, but she attempts to overthrow the headmasters. So it's about resilience in the sense that Maple is a real plucky young woman. She's about 12 when the novel begins and about 20 when it ends. She's defiant, stubborn, persistent. She has a lot of resilience and a lot of robustness that most of the other members of the community don't have, because they've been raised all their lives in a community where they are oppressed. And another thing I didn't mention is they are not allowed to talk about the past, because these headmasters, if one moves from this person to this person and then maybe to the next person in another generation, the memories of the first people come with them. And then if the new host happens to trigger some of the previous host's memories, then that can sort of fry their brain. And of course, one way of triggering memories is by talking about the past. So in this community, everybody has decided we are not allowing ourselves to talk about the past. So how do you fight back against something if you are not allowed to learn about or remember your past, to talk about it with others, to talk about your own personal past with others? And so most of the other people in this community, they are just beaten down. They become almost like automatons. Like even when they are, the few hours per day when they are not being directly controlled by the headmasters, they're kind of just going through the motions of life, most of them. So yeah, they are very, very oppressed. And that interests me because, I've got a lot of interest in social justice. My family is Mennonite. I don't know if you're aware of what Mennonites are in South Africa. A certain kind of Anabaptist Christian who are pacifists and advocates for social justice. So I've always been interested in social justice and the fact that there are so many people, so many communities, so many ethnic groups that are and have been oppressed for so long. In Canada, we have treated Indigenous peoples horribly for 400 years. That's beginning to change, but in some ways it might be too late. Some of the Indigenous languages have already been lost. So, yeah, it's kind of about Maple's journey is, I guess, one of hope and resilience to throw off the shackles of the oppressors, and that's what I want to be able to happen to everybody in the world. Even if their oppressors are not like monsters like the headmasters, they might be oppressors of poverty or poor education or broken families or things like that. But there are so many awful things out there that are keeping people down that we who do not face those same obstacles, I think we're obliged to try to help them to overcome them. I mean, that's why else are we here as humans?
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Now, my next question to you was not crafted knowing what I know about you now, and therefore I'm more interested in getting your answer than I was previously.
Sure.
So you've written extensively about food, language, and culture.
Yep.
What are some of the challenges that you faced transitioning from nonfiction to crafting a really, really complex young adult dystopian world?
Yeah, it was a big shift. It's kind of like you're driving along a highway at 100 kilometers an hour in a standard stick shift, and all of a sudden you have to shift into first gear or something. It kind of felt like that, a big shock. Because it's different ways of thinking. And I encountered something similar to that after I finished my PhD in 16th century English literature. I approached CBC Radio, which is Canada's national radio broadcaster. And I said, I'd be happy to do some columns about language. And they said, sure, let's try it out. So I would write the columns, and the producer, who was both very fierce and demanding and yet very patient, she would say to me things like, you can't read this. This this sounds awful, on air. It sounds like you're an academic. Well, I guess I was, and it was things like learning. You don't really, it sounds better on the radio, I think, to use the word but instead of the word however. It was things like that. And speaking and writing in more coordinate clauses and less subordination, things like that, from a grammatical perspective. So same kind of thing, shifting from nonfiction. Sometimes what I am doing even more in my current the novel I'm working on now is it's a novel in which the narrators all have different voices, very, very different voices. And the challenge there is maintaining that. Sometimes I'll be writing and I'll realize, I've slipped out of the voice of this character. So then I have to go back, and what I found helpful actually was creating little character studies of each one of them, and even finding a photo of some random person online to associate with them. So yeah, there were challenges, but at the same time, as I was saying, I was ready to move on from nonfiction to fiction. Yeah, it feels like the right thing to do, and it's something I want to keep doing for as many more years as I have.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I do want to make a correction. You're in Canada, not England.
Yes, yes. My grandmother came from England, from up near Manchester.
Oh, awesome. I don't know where England came from. I have no idea, and I apologize for that. We don't want people to the wrong part of the country or the world. So, okay, well, we have time for one more quick question, and our time just goes by so quickly. The relationship between Maple and Thorn. So we'll go kind of back to the story. Yeah. It adds an emotional layer to the story, and it's just, I mean, there's so many layers that you're talking about with this, but I mean, I could see this in a movie or film. Absolutely. How did you ensure that their connection felt authentic, which is not always easy to do within such a controlled and oppressive environment, especially since if we've not lived there, so.
Yeah. Well, with regard to Maple, the young female protagonist, I actually based her on our youngest daughter. Roxana is her name. As I was saying, she's plucky and stubborn and resilient and things like that. All of our kids are resilient. So I had her in mind. And then for Thorn, he was sort of just an amalgam of different young men that I've known who are maybe not unique, but they have a certain kind of very, very practical problem-solving ability, and that's Thorn. So Maple is the one sort of working within Maple, for example, she encounters a spirit guide, for example. She's kind of working in that level of reality, whereas Thorn is a much more practical person, problem solver. His approach to getting rid of the headmasters is much more, okay, we'll do this and we'll do this and we'll sneak, etc., things like that. But even though they're very different, or maybe because they are so different, they do fall in love. And I think it's because at heart, they are both kind people. I mean, I remember reading in the New York Times a while back, a set of something like 27 questions that if you meet a stranger and you each ask each other these 27 questions and you respond honestly, that there's a very good chance that by the end of it, you might have fallen in love with that person. Just the process of getting to know them, getting to know their story. I know I'm sort of the king of digressions, but that also relates to our kids, because on the one hand, I know that the kids that we adopted, total fluke that we moved to this part of Canada, and my wife decided to volunteer for the Family and Children's Services Agency. So all of that is total fluke. On the other hand, it's absolute destiny. I mean, it had to be. So there's something like that about Maple and Thorn as well. It had to be, and yet they are very different. Another analogy I would throw in is it's kind of like John Lennon and Paul McCartney. The chance of these two geniuses of music, very different kinds of geniuses, that they were both from Liverpool and they met each other when they were 15 or something like that. on the one hand, it's pure chance, but on the other hand, can you imagine a world without the Beatles? It's just
No, we can't.
Yeah.
Mark, this was so much fun. We unfortunately are out of time, and we're going to have to invite you back because we didn't even cover ground on the questions we wanted to ask you today. But it was wonderful talking to you.
Thank you. I really, really, really enjoyed this. Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you next week on another episode of the Writer's Corner live show. Thank you for joining us on the Writer's Corner live show. 30 minutes of insightful author conversations with some of the biggest names in the industry, including award-winning authors and international indie sensations. Join us on the next episode of the Writer's Corner live show.